Well, welcome everyone. I'm Ed Niedermeyer. I am one of the co-hosts of the Autonocast, and I'm also the communications director for Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, as well as the author of Ludicrous, the Unvarnished Story of Tesla Motors, if we're going into all of the job titles. But I'm here today. I'm really excited about this because I get the chance to talk to two folks who are really at the forefront of exciting things in the autonomous vehicle space, and that are Karl Iagnemma, the CEO of Motional, and Laura Major, the CTO of Motional. There's so much happening in autonomous vehicles right now, even though some of that's been a little bit overshadowed by, of course, all of the other crazy things happening in our world. But it occurs to me that some people might be saying, wait a second, Motional, what's that? I've heard of Karl Iagnemma, I've heard of Laura Major, but what's Motional? So let's start there. What is Motional?
Yeah, well, in March, Hyundai Motor Group and Aptiv formed a joint venture focused on autonomous driving. And really excited today to be able to announce the identity of that joint venture as Motional. Motional's mission is to make driverless vehicles a safe, reliable, and accessible reality and deploy them in cities around the world. The name, comes from two parts. There's motion, which speaks to the products we're developing and our, forward progress as a business, and then emotional. Whether we like it or not today, transportation decisions have become emotional decisions. Deciding how you get from point A to point B safely is an emotional decision. So our name Motional speaks to that, and every product that we develop will have that insight, at its core.
Right. So really, it's about the human piece. I think a lot of times people are so focused on the technology of autonomous vehicles that it's easy to lose sight of the fact that this is about people, right?
Yeah, what we're building is not technology for technology's sake. It's about putting the rider first. Ultimately, the rider, the passenger, the users of our technology have to have confidence in the technology or they won't use it.
Yeah, and just to give people a little bit of background too about Aptiv, so the half of this joint venture that you come from. So how long? What is Aptiv, and how long have you been working on AVs, and sort of what's sort of the background that sort of built up to this moment?
Yeah, I can give a bit of background about both companies. Hyundai Motor Company, one of the world's foremost automotive OEMs. They build cars that are high quality and cost optimized, better than just about anyone else. Aptiv, one of the world's most prominent automotive technology developers. So that's the DNA of Motional. My background, I was leading autonomous mobility development within Aptiv before the joint venture. Prior to that, started a company called Nutonomy, one of the first startups in the autonomous driving space. And prior to that, was at MIT for many years, researching autonomous vehicles. Before we called them autonomous vehicles, they were just robots.
Yeah. Absolutely, and there's a lot of partnerships in this space between OEMs and technology developers, a lot of collaboration going on. But this is one of the first big joint ventures, and it seems like that sort of separates it potentially from some of the other partnerships that people might hear about. Sort of why make a joint venture, and sort of what does that mean? How does that differentiate it from potentially other approaches that are out there to these kinds of collaboration?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that we realized is that we really needed to have a close relationship with an automotive manufacturer. When we were purely focused on developing the software, that integration challenge, getting the software integrated with the hardware, we recognized that was a really significant challenge. So the joint venture really came about from the realization of us saying, boy, if we want to ensure that our technology gets onto vehicles that can be produced at scale, we need to go beyond an arm's length relationship with an OEM. We need to do something, much closer. So the joint venture, that's about as close as you can get. Our equity holders now 50% Aptiv and 50% Hyundai. So 50% OEM and 50% technology developer, if you will.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, there's been a lot of development work going on around AVs that you've been involved in for a long time and leading. And this is sort of a big step to collaborate. It seems like that implies that things are coming into focus here, that you're starting to get closer to getting more of these vehicles out there and building out a business. So sort of what is so what is the build up to that on sort of the technical side look like in terms of where your technology's at? What are some of the details that maybe, in all this craziness of the last 6 months or so, really, that people might have not be aware of sort of the progress that's been made?
That's a great one for Laura, our CTO.
Yeah, so Motional really builds on top of the autonomous driving division from Aptiv. And we're combining Aptiv's, self-driving software expertise with Hyundai's, vehicle engineering and manufacturing expertise combined with the capital. And we're doing all of that to create a level 4 driverless robo-taxi product. And this year, we're going to debut our first driverless technology, and as well as announce other key partnerships and new market activities.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people again focus so much on the technology that they may not always understand why it's so important to have that OEM presence, the manufacturer, be there sort of as you're developing this kind of product. Sort of from a technical perspective, why is that so important to have that collaboration between the development of the software and the hardware, but then also the input from the people who develop and then make the vehicle?
Yeah, as Karl mentioned, the arm's length relationship with the OEM just didn't cut it. Ultimately, it needs to be a tight partnership to figure out how we're going to modify the vehicle to be able to enable the AV components to work in a way that's sustainable, that can be done at scale, that can ultimately come off of a production line. And so it really requires that tight partnership to design the entire solution as a system that includes the software, the components, and the vehicle. And so we need to do that together in close partnership.
Yeah. And so what is this relationship going to be looking like just sort of over the next year or two? Sort of walk me through a little bit how this is going to, move forward and develop.
Well, I can speak to the relationship. We obviously have a very close working relationship with Hyundai. They're one of our stakeholders. We are today focused intensely on getting our autonomous technology integrated with a Hyundai vehicle. Now, with all that said, we are not in an exclusive partnership with Hyundai and obligated to only use Hyundai vehicles. And by the same token, not obligated only to use Aptiv componentry, sensors, and other solutions. So moving forward for the JV, I envision a future where we have multiple partners in the automotive world. I think we're seeing many partnerships struck across the entire AV landscape. We look forward to continuing, an aggressive partnership strategy.
Yeah, and so you mentioned the robo-taxi application. Sort of, how do you see that fitting in with cities and sort of how they're evolving? There's all kinds of new mobility options out there. Autonomous vehicles are one of those sort of developing options that people are getting excited about. Sort of, how do you see that fitting in? Where do robo-taxis solve the problem?
Well, robo-taxis will be a transportation choice. And of course, riders will have many other choices. We work closely with city representatives, state representatives in every city that we're active in, everywhere we test. We want to make sure that we're developing technology, number one, that our customers want to use, but number two, that our city partners want to have on their streets. But the promise is vast, significant increases in safety, significant increases in transportation efficiency, and significant improvements to accessibility. So our, city partners understand all those potential benefits. And in the cities that we're in, we're there because our city partners want us to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously I don't want to get, have to be careful not to ask too many specific questions here, but is this something that, can you give us a sense of sort of in the next couple of years, what we might be able to see in terms of, is this going to be a bunch of cities? Are you going to be focused on maybe one or two to start? I know you already Aptiv has vehicles already in Las Vegas and elsewhere, I think. So what can we expect in terms of sort of the presence of this and sort of the scale of it?
We're one of the only major players in the industry that has a significant international footprint. We're obviously focused on North America. I'm sitting here in Boston today. Laura's here in Boston. We've got significant operations in Pittsburgh, in Las Vegas, smaller office in Santa Monica, but we're also in Singapore and in Seoul and growing there very quickly. As we think about going to market, and your question about what cities will be in the future, having that broad footprint and that flexibility that comes with it is going to be extremely valuable for us. I think there's an open question globally as to where autonomous technology will get to market first. That question will be answered both by where consumers want the technology, where they want those products, but also where regulators will allow that technology to go to market, to get on the road. So with us, with Motional having a global footprint, we're going to maintain flexibility and go to market where the best opportunity presents itself.
Yeah. And even before those deployments, as you said, having presences in cities, those are some pretty different cities, right? Los Angeles and Pittsburgh alone, but then Singapore. These the makeup of these cities, the kinds of traffic, the driving culture has got to be really different. Does having that presence in lots of different places, does that help the technology?
Yeah, definitely. The diversity of environments, for testing and development purposes, gives us, sets us up to develop a robust solution that's going to, be able to translate from one region to another very easily. So we see left-handed driving, we see right-handed driving, we see different kinds of pedestrian behavior. Even, cities as different as Los Angeles and Boston. Then you add Singapore and Seoul. There's just a wide range of more driver-friendly cities, more pedestrian-friendly cities, and having exposure to that, collecting data in those environments, testing our product in those cities, gives us that ability to really see how our solution fares in that very dynamic and diverse setting.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, Ed, we're developing a global solution. One of the things I've focused on from the very beginning is avoiding developing a solution that wouldn't generalize to other cities around the world. Laura's example of left-hand driving and right-hand driving is a great one. Every time we do a build of software, we know that it can drive both sides of the road. And if you think about that from a technical perspective, that change may sound simple for us as a human driver, but that change of shifting to the other side of the road to drive, that could be vastly complex and could break your system if you hadn't designed from day one with that scalability in mind. So we're confident, we'll have the ability to go to market globally. And that's not something that I'm sure all of our competitors can say.
Yeah, no, that flexibility is a really interesting and important part of it for exactly those reasons. But Laura, you also said, this is a level 4 robotaxi, which means that when these things are out there and people can start getting rides in them, they will be focused in certain areas, right? That's what level 4 is. And actually, if you could maybe just give a little bit more of an explanation about sort of what level is, just to make sure people really understand it and why that approach makes sense in your view.
Yeah, so for a first of a kind driverless product, we feel like it's important to do a lot of testing in the city, the cities where we're going to launch. And so while we are designing a solution that can be generalized across many different cities, we're going to also step through that deployment very carefully. So we have high fidelity maps that we develop that are on board the vehicle that we use to navigate and guide our decision making. And again, we go through a rigorous validation and testing effort in those cities. So, level 4 is really about, kind of being able to do all of the driving tasks, but being able to really, kind of focus that in a particular area for each of your deployments.
As I've already brought up, it feels like way too many times, there is a lot going on this year. And specifically with the COVID-19 pandemic, this seems to be, there's a lot of really interesting discussion in the autonomous vehicle world, because in a lot of ways it seems like it's both a challenge, but also potentially maybe an opportunity. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I can speak to the opportunities. When COVID struck, I became convinced that that people would recognize really the value of a driverless experience and the value of being able to take a trip and not necessarily have to share space with someone that you may not know. So that was a hypothesis. We went out and we asked people. We did a survey. We talked to over 1,000 people in the US. And what we found is that, a couple statistics, 70% of the people we talked to said that the risk of infection strongly influenced their transportation decision. It became an emotional decision, as we talked about earlier. 19%, almost 1 in 5 of the people that we spoke to said that they were more interested in riding in a driverless vehicle today than they were pre-pandemic. And to me, that just underscored, the importance and the relevance of what we're building. So the opportunity to me is greater than ever. But, in terms of the challenges, of course, from a technology development perspective, when your team is at home and it's difficult to test, that does create some complications. Maybe Laura, you can speak to some of those.
Yeah, certainly. Some of the challenges, we can continue with our software development during coronavirus from people's homes and make a lot of great progress that way. But the testing on public roads, became more challenging, and we had to come up with innovative solutions to keep our test operators, safely separated within a confined space of the vehicle. And so we've worked through those issues.
And actually, one of the really interesting things is a lot of times simulation ends up becoming an important. It's already always a fundamentally important part of AV development. Maybe it's becoming more important now. If you could just explain sort of why simulation is important anyway, and maybe if that's its role has changed at all during COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. We depended on simulation much more than we did pre-COVID, but it's an integral part of AV development already, because as you're developing software, every software engineer, when they're checking in their code, they want a way to quickly test it in a virtual world. And so that's what simulation offers, the ability to, without any worries about safety, go into this virtual world and try out their software change and see, again, evaluate its performance across a wide range of scenarios. You can do that very quickly, very cheaply in simulation. In order to get something out onto the road, we have to take more steps, and there's more rigor around making sure that the performance is refined and robust enough to, again, handle a range of conditions that you can't predict on the public roads. So we have to go through close course testing on our tracks and go through a number of repetitive tests, again, to make sure that it's robust to a wide range of scenarios. Again, in simulation, you can quickly try something out and get that feedback, very rapidly. So that's something we use already in our development process. But during COVID, we rapidly expanded the number of simulation scenarios that we have. Our vehicle operators, actually, many of them became trained on how to create scenarios in our simulation environment. And again, we were leveraging that, with our incremental builds that we were developing before we could do public testing again.
Yeah. And so, Karl, you mentioned that people are more interested in self-driving vehicles since COVID-19 has happened. And I think it makes sense, especially when you think about things like public transit and just other things where you're, stuck with a lot of people inside a confined amount of space. At the same time, robotaxis are shared vehicles, right? And so there's, this is clearly something that you'll have to deal with. And again, without giving anything away, are there technical things that can be done to ensure these vehicles are safe, that it's not a transmission vector? Is basic just fleet management, cleaning, maintenance type of stuff, is that enough? You're going beyond that? I don't know, to the extent that you can discuss these.
So it's a great point, Ed. Look, even if you're not sharing a trip with someone you don't know, it may be that you get into a vehicle after someone has just gotten out. COVID has caused us to really redefine safety. Prior to the pandemic, safety meant avoiding crashes. Now, for us, safety means not only avoiding crashes, but minimizing the risk of infection. So to answer your question, there's both technical and operational things we can do to ensure that our vehicles are as safe as possible. The technical part of it, will get baked into and is currently getting baked into our product development process. And there are methods out there for disinfecting surfaces that, we're exploring. Operationally, the question of when we would want to bring a vehicle back for human intervention, to have someone either wipe it down, clean it off, or some other operational process. Again, that gets rolled into our operational model. So, we're confident that we can put systems on the road that are safe. And obviously, we're not going to put a product in the market until we're 100% convinced that it's safe now in that new dimension of safety.
Yeah, absolutely. And so also in your survey data, I mean, you say that half Americans say they would ride in a self-driving car given the opportunity. 62% believe they're the way of the future. So sort of with that in mind, like what can people sort of expect from these vehicles? I think there's, people have really struggled for years now since it's become more of a public thing to understand sort of where is this technology? How close is it? Is this something I'm going to be able to ride tomorrow? Is this something I'm going to be able to ride in 10 years? Mm-hmm. And I know these are very difficult questions to ask and you get asked them all the time, but if there's a way to sort of give people a way to think about sort of what this future is going to look like.
Well, I will tell you first, public perception of AVs is really interesting because we're often asking people about a technology that many haven't yet experienced. In Las Vegas, where we're operating what I believe is the world's largest open to the public commercial autonomous mobility service, we've given over 100,000 rides. Most of those people who've taken rides hadn't previously been in an AV. 98% of our riders, when they get out of the vehicle, give us a 5-star rating out of 5. What we've seen is that once people experience the technology, they become open to it and are willing to adopt it. The caveat there, the asterisk, is that you have to deliver a ride that's safe, that's comfortable, and that drives in some way like a human would drive, like you or I would drive. If you can do all those things, people will accept the technology. So excited by what we've seen so far. Now, the question of where, it really depends on where you are. If you're in Las Vegas today, if you're in and around the Strip, you can hail a vehicle, you can take a ride, you can experience the technology. But we're going to deploy the technology in a way that matches the cities that we enter with the technical readiness of the system. So another way to put that is, we won't be in Times Square in rush hour tomorrow. That'll be down the road. But we'll be in the cities with the driving conditions that match the capabilities of our vehicle. So we'll deploy gradually over time. It won't be a step change overnight where we wake up one day and there's autonomous vehicles everywhere all the time.
Yeah, and you mentioned accessibility before, and that's something I'm, have a little bit of a personal passion about, because I do think that, autonomous vehicles, there's an opportunity not just to provide mobility to people who are not currently well served by cars, but really like personal autonomy, which I think sometimes people don't think about what that really means. And it's a really important thing for a lot of people. And so you mentioned a couple of times now, sort of how important is that for you? And maybe can you give us a sense of some of the things that you have to do to sort of, make sure that's kind of that accessibility component is really baked into what you're developing?
Yeah, it's very important to us. It's about ultimately building a system that's free of some of the biases that are inherent, either explicit or implicit, in some of our other transportation solutions. And we can do that with autonomous vehicles. We have the ability to do that. And so it's a guiding principle. It's in our mission statement that we're going to build systems that are accessible. I can tell you that our city partners are very excited about that as well. They look at autonomous vehicles as a transportation option that has the promise of being much more accessible than some existing options.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I love the autonomous vehicle space because there's so much to talk about, and I'm just a yacker. I love to talk, but I have to imagine, as behind the scenes, you guys are working on this stuff. Are you getting really excited for this to be something that you don't just have to talk about, that you can really actually show people so that they understand, as you said, there's something about personally experiencing this stuff that just totally changes how you relate to it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak for myself. I get very excited to come to work every day. The mission, increasing safety, the potential impact, the 40,000 lives lost in the U.S. yearly, and many, many more worldwide, and the impact we can have on that is absolutely tremendous. So very easy to come to work, I can tell you that.
Yeah, I second that. The opportunity to really ultimately change the world, reduce the number of traffic-related accidents on the road and ultimately deaths, to improve the sustainability of mobility. It's very motivating, and as Karl said, I enjoy coming into work every day to work on this problem.
Yeah. Well, I personally am quite excited about this as well. I have been lucky enough to ride in one of Aptiv's cars in Las Vegas, which was a great experience. And I'm really excited to see where you guys go next and what this vehicle looks like and what this service is able to really do, not just for the technology, but for people and for these cities, because I think it is really important that we are able to actually see that instead of just talking about it all the time. So congratulations on this announcement, and thanks so much for taking the time to chat about this today.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. We're super excited, as I'm sure you can tell, to launch Motional.